This is Capturing Light, episode 167 with Kira Kelly, ASC.
Welcome to Capturing Light, a director of photographer's podcast, spotlighting cinematography tips, tools, and techniques, inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. And now, your host, Les Gaddis.
Welcome to the Capturing Light podcast. I'm your host, Les Gaddis, and today we are talking to Kira Kelly, ASC. We talk about her new film, Him, and we talk about a lot of other things too, like her navigating the industry. We talk a little bit about work-life balance at the end, which was fun. And we talk, all things Him, which was a great film. If you're listening to this when it's still out at the theater, go check it out. It's a good one. And the conversation was awesome. Here is that conversation with Kira Kelly. All right, so I want to thank Kira Kelly, ASC, for coming on the Capture Light podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. I'm excited to talk to you about Him, but before that, I kind of want to hear your perspective on like your upbringing in the film industry, how you got started, because I'm not sure how many people know like, like how you got started, but they may be familiar with your work.
Yeah, I mean, I get how I got started in the film industry, like broadly, or and then
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
let's start broad. So yeah, I first, I it was about loving taking stills in high school. I would just like, I was privileged enough to go to a school that had like a great art teacher, and she like, I don't remember us having a dark room, but she did have us take photos, and we would develop them and all that stuff, and so I just loved that. And then I really loved movies. I was a big fan of started off just watching a lot of television and then started getting into movies. I'm gonna date myself where like I was in high school when the Godfather 3 came out.
Mm-hmm.
That is, definitely not the best of the Godfathers of the
Right.
three. But I just remember being like, wow, this is cool. Like I liked the story. It was, interesting. And so that got me into seeing Godfather 1 and Godfather 2, which I hadn't seen before. And I just remember being, so into it and just like, I want to do this. And I couldn't have told you, like, I didn't know what a director did. I didn't know what a producer did. I didn't know what anybody, I didn't know any of the jobs, right? I just knew somehow
Right.
I wanted to work in film. So I ended up, going to film school. I showed my photos as like my reel. Um, and then I started studying and, really got into film theory and really interested in that, still really interested in that. And then I remember, you do as, everybody, not everybody, but I think a lot of people do when they're in film school, you work on other projects, other students' projects. And this one shoot, I found myself in the lighting department.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like looking at it was like a medium shot. It wasn't even that big of a setup, but I just remember being so excited by all the nets and the flags and the stands and the diffusions. I was just like, wow, this is cool. It was very
Mm-hmm.
fun setup for me, like the biggest setup I'd done before. And then the DP let me look through the eyepiece, and I just remember just like at that moment just being like, whoa. Like, this is we're creating this world around a frame that the audience never sees, but they see the effect of it all, And I just remember loving that so much. And just from then on, I was like, focused on cinematography, studied cinematography. When I graduated from school, I moved back to New York and started as an electrician. I would, start as a PA on like a lot of like, music videos and non-union commercials. And then, every gaffer I met, I'd be like, can can I work in the lighting department, or is there any do you have any jobs coming up, or things like that? And because when I was still in Chicago at school, like during the summers, I would stay in Chicago and worked on the trucks, like worked
Mm-hmm.
some of the lighting trucks there. Anyway, I digress. But but yeah, so I started, working as an electrician in New York, and this was like the height of music videos and like really like when there were big budgets and like I really got to learn so much by being on set and seeing how these different DPs did their thing, and I slowly worked my way up from like an electrician to gaffing. And then like during that whole time I was shooting, but it was a lot of like, I would shoot, documentary. And I think in that time it was still considered like documentary was a safe place for women to be able to shoot. Somehow there was this rule that yes, women can shoot documentary, but they can't really shoot anything else.
Right.
So I was able to shoot a lot there, but then still, worked my way up. I finally got my first feature in 2008, this movie called Were the World Mine with my friend Tom Gustafson directing. And after that, I was just like, I just want to focus on shooting. And it's a hard transition because it's like I was making like really good money as a gaffer, really good money, and like it's hard to, suddenly say no to those jobs, but then
Hmm.
just really have to focus on like, okay, this is what I want to do. So I was hungry for a while,
Right.
as I just started to kind of build my shooting career. Uh,
Right. Can you talk a little bit about, like, I guess going from gaffing, and I know you said that you started in photography and you went to film school, but like with a heavy focus on lighting and then kind of switching to cinematography, was there like a crazy learning curve as far as like, like understanding like cinematography from a camera perspective and like a leadership kind of perspective, or like, because you can kind of be a cinematographer that comes up the gaffing route, the cam route, like.
For me, I mean, the gaffing route was just the most natural. Like lighting is what inspired me the most of the time. And honestly, like even in school, I was just afraid. I was afraid to like handle the lenses because I thought my mom would have to pay for it if I broke one or something. So I definitely stayed more, lights were cheaper. Uh,
Yeah.
and then plus just lighting was I just found it to be so exciting, and I still find it to be like the exciting part. I think that there was definitely learning curves. The good thing was that, I started off on sets at like age what was it at that point? I guess it was like age 20 or 21. Like I was on set as an electric, just, running cable through the streets of New York. Like just like, and so you learn very quickly. I think a lot of folks that is just some place where you just learn the hierarchy of a film set and
Hmm.
not like, not like the assholeness of about it, but just knowing like, okay, these are the steps that things happen in. And these is like and that's invaluable, I think, to really learn how a set functions, learn how like, and obviously each set is different and has a different culture, but there is like a through line to knowing how to work on sets. And so that education came early. And then from there, it was just more about like just seeing how, different DPs could achieve, the same, like could achieve not the same, it's like such different looks with like the same lighting packages, or
Hmm.
working with the gaffers I was working with just to see like how their style would kind of change and adjust to each DP that they were working with. And, so it's like you kind of start to learn that there is no right way. Definitely like different DPs had different styles and different gaffers had different styles, all that stuff. But there was no right way to do that. You just use whatever feels. It's like whatever your style ends up being. There's no like rule to it. And I think a big thing I learned about, and I take this with me to today, is that one of my greatest teachers were not only the gaffers I was working with. It was like the key grips. Like really, specifically Rick Carmona in New York. Like he taught me so much and is such a great like was such a great lighting grip. Like of course, yes, grips, you do all the the camera rigs, the camera mounts, all that stuff that's so necessary and wonderful. I love that stuff too. But whenever I can get a chance to really work with a lighting key grip who, knows how to cut lights and will like, will shape and really like I come from the idea of like, yes, the electrics you put the light there and then the grips do all the beautiful stuff to it. I'm probably going to piss off a lot of electricians.
Right. No, I get it though.
But yeah, I mean, I learned a lot through that. And then yeah, definitely camera became something I had to learn and um still today when I do a camera order, I'm just like, this is the camera I want, these are the lenses I want, uh, these are the filters I want, and this is the monitor I like. But other than
Hmm.
just like all the cables and all that stuff, I can't. I'm just
Right.
I lean on my first ACs a lot, and luckily I've met some really great ones. So yeah.
Awesome. So, like, do you feel like your first narrative feature was kind of like your like big break, or was there like a moment where you felt like, okay, after school and transitioning into, a cinematographer from a gaffer, there was like a moment or a project where you're like, all right, I feel like I'm getting some traffic and navigating through the industry.
Yeah, my first feature was definitely a big break for me. It was one that it was like hardly any budget. But Tom, the director, and I, and like Corey, like who was also a co-writer but also production designer, we were really able to do a lot with very little and it was like a musical and it like did super well in the festival circuits and yeah, suddenly I was just like, okay, I can do a movie and I've done my first film and it felt like very much of an achievement and it kind of emboldened me to then realize, okay, I have to make a decision now of like, it's now time to move on.
Hmm.
And then yeah, after that I moved to LA, which may or may not, that's questionable. I should have maybe stayed in the city that made me that was suddenly going off. But I moved to LA and like my first TV show. So then I ended up getting my first movie out here, this movie called Pop Star, because that director had seen my first feature, War the World Mine, at festivals. And so that kind of, and then working with that director, Carlos, then he ended up putting together this show called East Los High that then was, the second season it turned union and so it was like my way into the union. I had been non-union like my whole time as like an electrician and a gaffer and as a DP and so that was my first turn into union work and then yeah things kind of it's funny you start looking at the through line of your career and there's always something that like hooks the next one or and it doesn't even feel that linear sometimes.
Right.
In hindsight you can kind of see the steps.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And, you go through, those projects and then, like a few other, documentary or TV series, and then you're
Yeah.
shooting him.
Exactly. And I mean that was a big part of another step is that, Ava DuVernay had seen a photo of me. I was very pregnant the first season of East Los High, and somehow she had seen some social media post of me with like my very pregnant belly and the camera. And so
Hmm.
she reached out, not even directed for a job, just like, oh, hey, I see you. And so it was like that sort of relationship. And then suddenly she, had this one smaller shoot, and then that turned into, hey, I'm doing this documentary called 13th. Are you interested in being one of the DPs? And I was like, obviously, yes. And then that turned into, being one of the alternating DPs on Queen Sugar. And yeah. And so
Hmm. That's amazing.
those are,
Yeah. So him, was
yes.
that like how did you I guess like get approached about that project? Like how like can you talk about like some of the steps as far as like pre-production and your early part in the creation of it before we start getting into like some of the production stuff?
Yeah. So initially, with him, Jamal Watson is one of the producers, and I think that he was somebody that we had been like circling around each other for a little bit, trying to work together. He had was working at Monkey Paw and was one of the producers of him, and threw my name into the ring of possible DPs. So I'm forever grateful to Jamal. But yeah, then I had the meeting and It was right around strikes time, so like there was a big lull after got the meeting to what sorry, there was a big lull between me reading the script and getting, having the meeting to when I actually got the job. So when I got, finally when it came through, I was really excited. I, met up with Justin, tipping our director pretty much right away, and we just started going through some different ideas for visuals, and he had such a really beautiful lookbook. When we started, it was very like super stylized, super like, things that were about lighting and camera, but also like specific production design and costume design notes. So it was a really great way to start the job of just like having, the script, but then also a director who had like a pretty clear vision of what he wanted to do, but then was also super open to any and all collaborations of like how to, start riffing off of those ideas.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, he started throwing out these like fun references, like this movie called Unholy Mount, The Holy Mountain, which is like something I had not seen before, which was so trippy and so great. I was just suddenly realizing, wow, this could be something really cool, just visually and like, playing with imagery in a way that, I hadn't been able to do yet. And so Justin was also really great about like being able to bring in, I remember these meetings that we would have. It would be Justin, me, our production designer, Jordan Ferrer, our costume designer, Dominique Dawson, and we would all just sit together. And it was like this page turn that also became just like this story arc meeting of just like where Cam is. Like he's starting here, and then he's starting descending into this, kind of a hellscape sort of thing, and like where the different moments happen for him. And so in that sort of space, the four of us were really able to talk about like, I was talking about like I want to do this color for this scene, and Dom was like, okay, cool, then maybe I'll try this color for her outfit, or maybe, like we really, worked I worked super closely with Jordan, the production designer, about all of the integrated lighting we needed in the recovery room and all those other side sets. So it really became a place where we were all very, very communicative, very collaborative. And so I think that we ultimately succeeded in a way where we have a movie where all of these department heads, led by the director, are telling the same visual story. And I feel like that's one of the strongest things, just about it is like our working relationship throughout that.
Right. Yeah, and like as far as like those meetings and you're talking about like color, I'm just thinking about like the collaboration with like the production designer and your understanding, like you said, of film theory when you were in, like school and then constantly studying. Like could you talk a little bit about some of the reasons behind why you made some of the color choices? Because I mean, there's some pretty bold, color
Yeah.
choices and like it's very different and more stylized than like some of your previous work.
Yeah, and that for me was where so much of the fun was. Like we already knew, like, from Justin, like he really wanted the Savior's party, like the party toward the end of the film, to be like this red color. We knew we wanted like a deep red. But then I was trying to figure out like, just figuring out ways of distinguishing between like, a lot of times like red is like, it's anger, it's human blood, it's all those things. And I really wanted to play out more of like red being like this sensual sort of ritual sort of feel. And so I ended up mixing that with this like deep amber and deep orange. And that kind of was what I wanted to tip the hat off of to the sauna scene, because that also has more of those deeper oranges. So you kind of feel, that's the one place where the two of them are almost together, but then this huge violent act comes and rips that apart. So we knew for, those two scenes, I kind of knew where we wanted to go. And then I just started mapping out the whole movie and seeing where like when he first gets to the recovery room and he's in the ice bath. I wanted it to feel very calm and very, warm and all that in like warmer tones and but not too much neutral lighting color wise. But then there's that one moment, there's a click when they all leave the room and this darkness comes and there's this big blue. And so I knew there wanted to be that transition. There's a scene where, Cam is in the hyperbaric chamber and
Hmm.
they're talking about, another conversation about, what are you going to sacrifice and what do you want and what are your desires? And that that scene always kind of the green came to me just because of this idea of like envy and jealousy or wanting something that's out of reach or wanting something that somebody else had. And I found this like I think it's called velvet green, the green that we used, and it was just like being able to contrast that with this really deep blue. It was kind of an unsettling combo that I loved.
Hmm.
And then when we were in the room with the girls and they're partying after this whole death has taken place, it was just like this sort of sexier vibes of like these, cyans and lilacs or violet and like magenta. So I had a whole plan for each scene. Oh, and then ultimately, sorry, I'm skipping around.
Hmm.
Ultimately, the last scene, we knew that we were going super red for the party. And I didn't want to go super red again for that fight scene that's in the film room fight, which
Yeah.
is just about like these. I wanted it to be warm, but I didn't want to do just red again. So we did this like fuchsia or like magenta feel with like these red highlights that just to me just was like, just felt like anger.
Right.
And just like alarm. And so during the camera test, I knew, before the camera test, I knew what each scene I wanted to target color wise. And then at the camera test, I was able just to quickly like, make the color combinations to see it on Tyreek, to see it on Marlon, and just make sure the colors worked for each one. So we had a pretty good plan from the beginning of all the different color worlds that we would be playing in. So
Right. And when you were testing, were you using like I was reading in the American Cinematographer, and also congrats on the cover because that's awesome.
it's my
So
first cover. I'm very
yeah, like no, it's
very
awesome.
happy. Yeah.
So I know that you were using Titan tubes and a bunch of them for
Yeah.
certain scenes, like where like during the testing, were you using Titan tubes or other type of RGB light? Like what's your kind
We
of
we used a lot of Titan tubes and then we also had a lot of vortexes
hmm.
in the ceilings and all those different spaces. And so we during the test, I mean, a really incredible gaffer, Bob Bates, and his team, like what we ended up doing, we found the colors. I believe we started with the vortex color space, and then we went from vortex color space and then found as close because the numbers don't
Yeah,
exactly
yeah, yeah.
match. So then we would find so once I found the colors that I liked in the vortex color space, Bob was then able to find all the matching colors in the Asteras.
Hmm.
So that would then matching. And then we had like, within the hallways and then in the recovery room, we had these LED strips that were a different color space. So it was a lot of like trying to, prep wise when they were building and like lighting the sets of making sure that the colors matched, all those different color spaces.
Right. So in your testing, let's talk camera and your decision on the camera, and then I know there's some thermal camera stuff. Could you talk a little bit about like your decision on why you picked a certain camera and then the reasoning behind, the thermal camera?
Yeah, so we shot with the Alexa 35.
Hmm.
And that was my second movie that I shot with it. And then I've done like so many commercials, but in between there too. But I just love the camera. I felt like, the first movie that I did with it was this movie called Resball, which is definitely more of a naturalistic lighting style and cinematography. But I just thought it was like so beautiful and like the skin tone rendition and then this one I knew that like I wanted to do push a lot of color. I
Hmm.
knew there was going to be a lot of color saturation and contrasting color. And I just feel like that sensor handles all of that so well. Like it really takes a lot to clip those colors. And even when you do clip them, it's like easy to bring them, either bring them back on set, hopefully. And then
Right.
if you have to later, it's easier to bring them back. But yeah, I love that camera. And I just feel like I know that sensor so well, it just ends up being my default. I should probably, every time I test with other ones, I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
Let's end up coming back to it. Um, and we shot with the, Panavision T series lenses, and then we had a whole slew of other lenses that supported the T series that got into all of like the hallucinations and things like that. And then what happened with the Fleur was like, for early on in conversations, like we were trying to figure out a way. I think we as humans have become very used to witnessing violence, I guess, unfortunately, right? And
Hmm.
then it's for, football also, or any sort of contact sports, we're used to like, oh wow, they just took a bad hit. But then it's just like not being, we really wanted to figure out a way to show what that hit actually does to the body. Like,
Hmm.
is like, a lot of players in like American football, they like a 4 year, that's 4 years to play, and like, and then but their bodies have been put through so much, like between like all the hits, between all the training, all this. So we really wanted to figure out a way to actually show that. And I know Justin had showed me early in prep this music video that he had seen with thermal camera, and then Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest had just come out, and
Hmm.
he had had that whole just gorgeously haunting sequence at night with the young girl that he shot with thermal camera, that was just so beautiful. And so we got the idea early on that we wanted to shoot it with thermal, and then we also wanted to be able to shoot it so that we wouldn't have to cut. Like, obviously there's a cut there, but we wanted it to be the same frame. So it's almost like you're seeing the frame with the Alexa 35, and then at the point of impact, you flicker right into the same exact frame in the FLIR in the thermal camera. So we had to figure out how to do that. And we got the camera very late, like in prep. I think we got it like 2 days before the camera test.
Oh, wow.
So we were trying to, at first I was trying to do like a stereo rig, but then the thermal wasn't seeing through filters because it doesn't see through glass. And then because the glass emits, temperature. And then so then basically we ended up coming up with this rig which had the Alexa 35 on the bottom, and then Rudy Covarrubias, my key grip, built this bracket so that we could rest the thermal camera right on top of the Alexa lens. So
Hmm.
with the Alexa, we were using the 50 mil, and we figured it out, like if we had those like one camera on top of the other about 5 feet away from the focus plane is where those two images would converge.
Mm.
We'd be able to kind of like our own sort of like homemade stereo rig.
Right.
And so, yeah, we started, Megan Noche, my first AC, she 3D printed a focus ring for it and then hot glue gunned it on there. Like it took two ACs, one pulling focus on each camera. But it ended up turning out so well. And so it's like, we shot everything on the Alexa, then the thermal. They put it together in post, and then VFX did things like, adding the brain and all that stuff, because, and then, our colorist Tom Poole at Company 3, like he just did amazing work with some of those sequences, just like inverting them and like making them negatives and all that. It just like it ends up being some of the trippiest footage. But like for example, like the scene that's shown in the trailer, the shot that's shown in the trailer with the two helmets collide,
Hmm.
that ultimately was the payoff, because it's like we wanting to show that like a concussion, people are like, oh yeah, it's just a concussion. They'll be okay. A concussion is literally your brain getting bruised because it's been slammed around in your skull. And so
Right.
I just love that we were able to kind of show that level of violence. Um, and to have it work, not just to show it, but like to work for story of like this is what is happening, under these helmets that are supposed to be protecting you. Um, and then the other thing with the thermal, I mean, we learned something about it every time we shot. Like, for the camera test, we had ice water, we had hot water, we had ice packs and then hair blow dryers, like just trying to figure out what different things we could affect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when you see the liquid pouring down their face, it's like all ice water coming down.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to that shot of the two helmets colliding, you know, we had to shoot that the training field that we shot in was this big tent, basically, that we rigged out. But we had to shoot those shots first thing in the morning because we were shooting white hot within the thermal tent sensor. And so I really wanted the background to, like when you're shooting for thermal, you really have to think more just about contrast.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, tried to do them first thing in the morning so that the tent would still be cold and that background would be darker or,
Right.
uh,
Right.
darker so that we could get some sort of that contrast there. So it's a whole different way of thinking about it, but it's fun. It's a fun.
Yeah. That's awesome. This is another, I guess, technical question.
Yeah.
But before we get into like wrapping it up with inspiration and things, but your use in like aspect ratios,
Oh
and I
yeah.
know in your previous work, I know you shoot anamorphic, you shoot some spherical. Could you talk about like specifically in him, why the different aspect ratios, what you were going for, how that could help, tell the story.
Yeah. So we really, it was funny before we even had like a decision to shoot it this way. Justin was talking about like that beginning sequence where we're seeing, young Cam and like his family, and he's witnessing this horrific injury that happens to his idol, Isaiah. He was always talking about like, oh, it's almost like a short film. It's like a short film, like, outside of the story, and we kind of, it just sets us up to for what, Cam's history. And
Hmm.
that kind of stuck with me as like a short film. And I was just like, wouldn't it be cool if it was just like, felt different? Like we knew the whole time we were going to shoot anamorphic. We know that was the aspect ratio that both Justin and I responded to most for this one. But then, yeah, I started like thinking about, and I pitched to him doing 16:9
Hmm.
for that beginning section and really just playing into like, him as this little kid and suddenly his world completely changing in this one instance that he's, forced to look at something just terrible. Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, we tested it out on the camera test and like Justin liked it, the difference in feeling it made it feel like its own world. We ended up shooting with the H series spherical,
Hmm.
just gorgeous. I love those lenses.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we wanted to make sure that that part of the movie, even though I think it's just like maybe it's 3 or 4 minutes at the beginning, feels like it's its own world. And then suddenly he's like off into this other very crazy world. But yeah, we wanted it to feel like it's its own film.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And while because I know we're coming up on time, inspiration, like where do you get inspiration from as a cinematographer?
I I mean, I still take a lot of photos. I still, do my best to, go to I have, one of my favorite spots is like the Huntington in
Hmm.
Pasadena and like go there and just take pictures with my camera. I think that I learned early that, obviously, especially as a cinematographer, I'll speak for myself. Like I'm not always working.
Yeah, yeah.
Although part of my mind is like, I should always be working. Why am I not working on something? Blah, blah. But in those times when I'm not working, instead of like trying to stress about it, I really do just enjoy finding another creative outlet for myself. And that ends up being, I feel like it's as a DP, it is so much of a creative outlet. And like you can get into this thing where like you're on a job for 4 months and suddenly, oh God, yeah, everything is like this sort of thing. And then once
Hmm.
it ends, you're kind of screaming out for something creative to do. And so I love taking photos and I just really have a collection of probably the most nonsensical things. But I do think it's something that's like really important. I tell my mentees this sometimes too, of just like, taking photos is where once you start taking them and actually looking through your photos and see what things repeat. Like
Hmm.
what are you drawn to? What do you find yourself always taking photos of? What do you find that like there is a through line? And so I feel like that's something where you can really start honing in on your own style and my own style, what I enjoy, what framing I like, and that's something that I love just to give myself permission to play with. Um, I mean, movies. I go to movies as much as I can. You know, I'm the person there like Tuesdays at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Um, and then museums. I mean, I feel like LA has such a great, selection of like art museums, that you can really just go. And I think it's important to see all the different, crafts and really sort of find. I don't know. I find yourself in that. So I'm always, yeah, I'm staying motivated by that. I'm staying motivated by, looking at my peers' work and just like seeing when somebody does something incredible and yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, and I know you mentioned that you're not always working, which I mean, I hear that and I feel that and that spoke to my soul.
Yeah.
One thing that I like to ask because it's very personal to me, and I know like we all as cinematographers deal with it, but like work-life balance. I have a 6 and a 7 year old, and I've done, like I'm in school, right now currently, but I've done the features and the this and that. And you're just like, how do you like navigate ish?
I'm of the opinion like the work-life balance. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I don't know if there really ever is any balance, or the things are just so completely out of balance sometimes. Like when I'm, on a movie, like I just wrapped a movie that was shooting here in LA, and it was during her summer break, and it was just like, oh great. So it's
Yeah,
like, the time I get a movie in LA, which is like obviously a miracle at this point, anything shooting in LA, which is we should be doing.
right.
The fact that it was her summer break, and I was like, oh, there's no balance there. But I do feel like on the times when I'm not working, then I, try to make sure I'm doing all the pickups and all the drop-offs and just being able to make myself as available to her as possible. I think that, a lot of times, and I've been so guilty of this in my life, not guilty, but just susceptible to this, um, is that, it's very easy as a cinematographer to have your self-worth wrapped up in how many jobs or how many days you shot this month, or what your next thing is, or what you just wrapped, or what you're working on. Like I really have to be vigilant with myself about like being just kinder of
Yeah,
like, oh, I feel like we all have so much more to offer than just like, how busy we are. And especially with the climate of our industry in the last like 3 years, it's just been, it's really painful if you wrap your self-worth around like how much you're working or not. So I really try to just defocus that and really just focus more on like how much am I creating for myself? And that kind of goes back to like, it's like we are artists, and we do need some sort of creative output. And for me, that's where I try to, instead of thinking of my self-worth as like how many jobs I'm booking, it's like, no, how much time have I actually just like gone around and looked at a tree or
yeah,
totally random. But you know what I mean? Like really
right,
just like figuring out different places where our self-worth can be tied to, you know,
right.
and that
Awesome.
helped me.
Yeah. So can you give us your website, your Instagram, like your social, so people can keep up and follow you and your work?
Yeah, it's Kira Kelly DP, and that's on Instagram, and then my website's Kira Kelly DP. So it's pretty, yeah, that's I'm on social.
Easy.
Yeah, it's easy. But yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Kira, thanks so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So again, I want to thank Kara for coming on the Capturing Light podcast. Be sure to follow her on Instagram, go to her website, keep up with what she's doing, because I mean she's been doing some amazing work. Yeah, if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me at Les Gaddis on Instagram. It's probably the best place to reach out to me as far as questions. Yeah, this was a fun one. I really appreciate like just the conversation about not only the technology, but some of the reasons why decisions were made, and we got a little bit more into the artistry, which was just as cool. Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Capturing Light.
Thanks for listening to Capturing Light with Les Gaddis, a Director of Photographers podcast. Inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. A Gaddis Visuals production.